Here, let me unmute myself. We're going to get started. So my name is Audrey Maxwell. I'm the current president-elect of the Texas Society of Architects. On behalf of the Society, I want to welcome everyone to our second webinar. Today's webinar is going to focus on the impact the pandemic is having on small firms in Texas. We've gathered 3 firm leaders from across the state to share their experience with us today. I'm going to introduce them briefly. So first we have Greg Ibanez, who's joining us from Fort Worth. His firm, Ibanez Shaw Architecture, was founded in 2017 after the merging of 2 firms. They have 6 full-time employees currently, 2 principals and 4 architects in training. And they work on a range of projects, a pretty diverse portfolio that includes residential, restaurants, hospitality, and municipal work, just to name a few. Next, we have Eva Reed Warden, who's joining us from Bryan, where she's the principal at the Architects Studio. Their firm was founded in 1995, and they currently have 10 full-time employees. The firm portfolio has a range of projects that includes higher education, commercial, religious, and residential projects. Last, we've got Al York, who's joining us from Austin, where he is a principal at McKinney York Architects. The firm is in its 37th year and currently has 28 employees. Some of their current projects include a recreation center, a middle school, new office buildings for Frost Bank, and some residential renovations. I will be your official moderator today, and I will ask our 3 panelists a series of questions. Time permitting, we're going to open the floor to Q&A at the end of our discussion, and you can submit questions by using the Q&A function on the lower bar of your Zoom screen. So with that, let's get started. First, I want to ask all of our panelists about the current state of their workload. Greg, would you be willing to kick us off?
I would, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Our only backlog issue is that it is very low. We have had a number of projects go on hold from a number of airport lounges, hardly surprising, but also restaurants, commercial, single-family residences. In the last 2 weeks, we have picked up 2 small renovation projects, so we're taking that as a good sign.
That's great. Eva, you want to?
Ours has kind of been a mixed bag. I think initially, as the situation was first starting, there was a bit of a panic. We had 3 projects almost immediately go on hold. It's been a little bit kind of moderating since then. We have had 1 project come back because they determined that their funding was earmarked and couldn't be spent another way. We've had some small renovation projects get started, mainly with the higher ed clients that we have. You know, basically taking care of business kind of projects. So 1 church project go completely on hold.
Okay. And Al, what's been your experience?
Audrey, first I want to thank you and the TXA for doing so much during this crisis, organizing these for our members. It's really, I know, a lot of work, so thank you. Our current workload, we have work for our current staff, but I have noticed that our backlog, at least the backlog of work that's actual undersigned contracts, has begun to shrink. Some of that is some delays in owner approvals of proposals. A lot of our institutional clients, they are working remotely. Their processes for approving the go-ahead on some projects have been a little slow. We've seen some RFQs that we've been tracking for the last 6 or 8 months that we were anticipating to be released this spring have been delayed, so that chance to get those new projects has been put off a little ways. We've had 2 projects that have been delayed or put on hold One is a residential client whose finances were dependent on oil revenue, and the oil prices have really hurt that client's ability to confidently move forward. And we have one commercial project that has been put on hold because we were just about to start construction, and the ability of the developer to obtain financing right now is a little hampered in this.
Okay, good to hear. So next, let's talk about the infamous Paycheck Protection Program. I want to know first if your firm qualified, which all three of you, your firm should have qualified. And if so, did you apply and were you approved? And then to follow up on that, also tell us if you've been funded yet. So Al, can you tell us what your experience has been with the PPP?
Absolutely. We did apply within an hour, probably less than an hour of the form coming out. We applied, we were approved, and the money arrived, I think, last Wednesday, so about a week ago. Right now, we're just focused on documenting our legitimate expenditures from that money and doing cash flow projections for those outlays over the 8-week time limit for use of those funds. And simultaneously, we're building a catalog of the effects that COVID crisis has had on our business to be able to one, just qualify for the maximum amount of forgiveness, and two, be prepared to justify the business necessity of the loan should we be subject to the greater scrutiny that we're hearing the Treasury Department is planning to put on these loans on the back end as opposed to the front end.
Okay, and Greg, what about your firm?
We did apply. We applied the first day. We were funded on 4/20, party time. But like Al, we're tracking on a spreadsheet the costs and what's the whole thing everybody knows about. One aside from that, the week before we switched banks to Frost Bank from Wells Fargo. I had called, and I just didn't pay much attention to our banking relationship. And boy, that's a lesson learned right there. Boy, you really need to pay attention to that before you need it, because when you need it, it's too late.
Right. What about you, Eva?
Yeah, we did apply, did receive our funds about mid-April, and follow up to what Greg said. We've been with the same bank. They've changed names several times, but basically the same people for 20 or so years. So having a long-term relationship with those folks, I think, really helped. I was on the phone at 9 o'clock at night talking to our banker about what else he needed in order to get our loan process. It really appreciated them going to that extra mile to help us get that all to happen.
Okay, and you may have said this, but did you guys have received funding?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
We were funded about the 15th, I believe.
Okay, got it. All right, well, next let's talk about transitioning to remote work. I'm interested to know what changes you guys have made to accommodate this wonderful new way of working. So Eva, do you want to tell us what your firm has done?
Sure. I think our transition went pretty smoothly. It wasn't effortless, but we have an IT company that we work with on a daily basis, and having them on board really helped us to implement any additional software we needed, like LogMeIn, so that we could begin working remotely. But I think our most significant challenges have been about finding the best means of communication with one another throughout this whole process and how it affects our productivity and people's state of mind. I think everybody has their own set of challenges by working at home. We have some folks who are super isolated, and then some that have school-age children, and some that are sharing workspace with older kids and spouses. So we recognized, really early on that people were going to have to adapt their schedules to make a balance for all these different things that are impacting how they work from day to day. We do have an office manager that comes in to take care of some things that have to be done in terms of payroll and such as that. And she brings some of her kids with her because it helps her deal with some of her child care challenges. In my own house, I've got a college student. I've got a spouse who's a professor teaching online. I have an older child who's a music teacher in addition to myself. So that's a lot of different Zoom meetings going on all at the same time. So really being flexible about how you work and where you work is really a must. So.
Great. So Al, what's your experience been like?
We've had several people in our office who have made arrangements to work at flexible hours, either in the evenings or weekends, to allow them to split time with their spouse, taking child care duties during the weekdays. That's in addition, we have about 15 to 20% of our employees that have asked for reduced schedules, working about three-quarter time going forward. We've in response to that, we've asked everyone that wanted to have that reduced time to go ahead and apply through the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Act, which allows us to be reimbursed for payment of their time off at 2/3 the rate. And then as long as they work 20 hours a week, which all of them want to, we're supplementing that to make up the 1/3 loss that they would see, and paying fully for the first 2 weeks of the EFMLA program that they would normally have to use their own PTO to take that time off. So it looks like that's going to allow almost everyone to not see any salary loss over the summer and into the fall as they have to take care of their children. And we're also being pretty rigorous about scheduling weekly project meetings that include everyone in the office at all levels within the firm, just to make sure that we're not leaving someone out floundering, not having good direction. And really, I've been really impressed with everyone's ability to perform and stay connected in this remote environment.
Great. And Greg, what has your firm transition been like?
Well, our 4 staff, other than Bart and myself, are all working from home. Bart and I are still coming into the office. We're quite separated within the office, and we have a pretty rigorous hand washing protocol upon arrival. Our employees took their computers home. We're Mac-based, and we gave each one an external hard drive, which functions as a time machine backup, so continuous backup. Within our office, we're server-based, so people don't put files on their hard drives. But in this case, we set up a Dropbox for the active files, and people are working from their hard drives, backing up to a Dropbox, backing up to an external, and then we're backing the Dropbox up into our office network at night. Because with the internet connections many people have at home, it's very arduous, particularly with BIM files. Our staff, luckily, I guess, we have individual people working on individual projects. So we don't have a lot of collaboration where we're having to do BIM cloud. But I am a fanatic about multiple backups, as my people know. We decided not to give our staff VPN server connections for security reasons. Maybe some of you read Zaha Hadid's office was hacked, and they suspect somebody at home, had an insecure connection into their server. So we are doing weekly video conferences with the staff and trying to stay connected as best we can.
Okay, and so then in terms of work culture, Greg, I know we all know how important that is, and working remotely can make that really difficult. How has working remotely impacted your way of working, your firm's way of working?
It's changed it significantly. Our practice is very collaborative, and despite the hype, there's just no substitute for working in person when you're doing design work. Much of my day before this happened consisted of moving around the office, sitting next to staff, sketching on tracing paper, marking things up, pointing at screens, and doing that digitally with all the markup tools. It's so crude. It's just not the same. So I'm often now doing sketches, scanning them, uploading them or emailing them. I mean, it's just incredibly cumbersome and tedious. And then not to mention looking at things together, looking at color samples, materials, casual office conversations, sharing news. I mean, that's all lost when you're remote. I mean, there's no doubt it's a significant productivity drop. Now, some of our people that are doing construction documents, it's a little different for them. It's not as much interaction. Their productivity level, I'm sure, staying high. But for things we have in design, it's slowing us down.
Fair. Al, what about you? Has working remotely impacted y'all's work culture?
I think a lot less than we anticipated. I have to agree with Greg. The one challenge is that during the design process, although I'll say we've been modeling and doing so many things in 3D for so long that pointing at screens and marking up screenshots or sketching something, taking a photograph of it and shooting it off. I mean, we were already doing that pretty regularly before the move back home or to home this time. What I will say is, we're really concerned about the sort of social aspects of the firm. I mean, a lot of people, I think we have a really enjoyable and rewarding place for people to work, and we're really focused on doing what we can while we're remotely to maintain that. So our staff have organized Friday happy hours. This past Friday we had a trivia night and had a trivia contest for an hour or so after work. We have staff who have organized twice weekly workouts in the mornings and in the evenings. They get a good turnout from people in the office. Of course, we continue to do our Monday morning staff meetings with everyone in the office, and about every 2 weeks on a Thursday, my partner Brian organizes a virtual luncheon sketch. We used to do this in the office, walk around when the weather's nice and sketch during lunch, and we are doing that remotely. It's actually really a lot of fun to see people in their own neighborhoods walking around and pointing out the things that are design interest to them. And we've also continued to sort of focus our culture on design. So we have what we call Design Flex, which when we have projects that are in those early phases of design, And even further along, those teams come and present them on an afternoon to the office, allow everyone in the office to really see the design thought that is going into that work and to throw out suggestions and help keep our focus on the quality of the design work we're doing.
Good. It sounds like some interesting things have come out of our very unique situation. Those are good ideas for all of us. Eva, what about your firm and your work culture?
I think very similar to what Al and Greg have mentioned. It's one thing to kind of deal with all the technological issues, but it's a whole other thing to try to find ways to keep people connected, and so that's psychological support. I think I sort of equate this whole process to almost like the grief process. I think we're kind of at that stage where everybody's feeling a bit worn out. Maybe we're going to get to that stage of acceptance at some point in time soon, but I think even with all the very creative solutions to try to keep us all connected, it's still pretty challenging. I think the lack of human contact or almost a sense of loss of sort of normal life is something that people have been contending with. And, I think part of that's just going to be time, but then, within our office, we're just trying to make sure we're staying in direct contact with each person individually. We're trying to maintain some sense of joviality, for lack of a better word, through some of our group discussions on Teams, using Microsoft Teams. It's kind of hard to have a water cooler conversation. You're not gathered around the water cooler, but somebody might lob out something they saw or something that is pertinent to what we're working on, and we can have a group conversation about it through Teams that way. Similar to what Al was saying, we've had some Zoom social gatherings, happy hours and such, and try to do some unique things. We have one person in our office who will always be famous for wearing a penguin costume to our happy hour, so we'll never forget that.
Good. So as a follow-up to that, Greg was talking about the way that their teams typically work, individuals for individual projects. How does that work in your firm typically?
It kind of varies by the size of the project. Oftentimes, you're working basically with a principal directly. So some of those conversations in terms of how we interact might be similar to what Greg was describing in sketches and such, and that is a bit more challenging. Like currently I'm working on a home renovation, and I'm basically going to be sketching and penciling things up in order to send on to the person who's working on that. Or it's a little different when you're in a construction document phase, and it's a little easier to line out the tasks. But trying to stay connected with each person individually, and then I agree with Greg also on the markup electronically. It's just not quite the same, and maybe it's faster for someone 20 years younger than me, but it's still much faster for me to redline something by hand than it is to try to do it on a PDF. So I think we're finding ways of coping with it. But.
Okay, and Al, can you tell us also how your firm is set up, like how you typically organize your teams and projects?
Sure. We have a wide variety of project sizes, and they require different size teams. So some projects are just a single person, but most people in the office are working on teams of 2 or 3 or 4 people, depending on where that project is at any one time. And we are using, we have a remote desktop set up for our people to work on our Revit server here in the office. And then we have multiple licenses of BIM 360 for people to be able to work inside the same Revit model. The collaboration is, well, we've been utilizing Bluebeam Studio for markups and for progress reviews, mainly because a lot of our clients want to have that capability. And I found it to be really useful. And after some initial challenges getting used to how you have to operate, looking at a big set of drawings on one screen at a time, the hot links inside the PDF that take me to the sheet where the detail was drawn from really have made it easier than searching through a set of documents. So I've really become a big fan of Bluebeam Studio.
Yeah, we've used that with a lot of success in our office too. So that's definitely a useful collaboration tool right now. So since you guys have all transitioned to this remote way of working, is there anything that you've learned doing this that you plan to continue when everyone goes back to the office? Let's see. We'll get Al to answer that.
I think one of the best things we're going to find come out of this is we do work a lot in a lot of places in the state, and many of our institutional clients have always expressed some reluctance to have meetings online. They want to see you in person, and of course that is an important aspect of moving through a project. But there's a lot of times where Zoom or GoToMeeting, screen sharing is useful, and I think a lot of our clients are beginning to overcome that reluctance to doing that, and I hope some of that carries forward, because time spent in an airplane or on the road is not productive or valuable really for anyone. So I think that's hopefully changing. I think we're all becoming more comfortable with the idea of people working outside the office for days at a time, much more so than we were before. And I could definitely think that allowing more flexibility in people working remotely would be something we'd really probably be more apt to continue going forward.
Good. What about you, Greg?
Well, I'm not sure, but I suspect we're the smallest firm represented here today with just 6 people. I'm not sure how big you guys are, Eva, but, you know, I don't want to be smug, but we haven't really learned anything. I mean, we use GoToMeeting. We've used it for years. We use it a ton. We have clients that are out of town. Even our clients we live in Dallas-Fort Worth. We're on the western edge. We have a major client in Plano. You know, they don't want to drive an hour each way for a meeting. So we do GoToMeeting meetings all the time with markups, and we have all those tools. I don't know. I'm not sure it's an age thing. I just don't think you can sell a client on a scheme in a GoToMeeting the way you can when you're in front of them. You can present more passion. You have body language. You can make eye contact. There's no sidebar conversations of people talking like, oh, I don't like that. It's something's lost. Our office is already flex schedule. We allow our employees tremendous flexibility of when they work. If they want to take a day off, we let them take a day off. They want to make it up. We're one of the advantages of being this small. We're very unregimented. We have a lot of personal responsibility given to our people. And when you get bigger, it's just harder to treat everyone like an individual. Or at least that's my experience previously working in big firms. So honestly, when this thing's over, I need to go to Zoom meeting detox because I am so damn sick of these things. And, you know, you can do happy hours and all that, and it's great, but I'm ready to be done with these things.
All right, good to hear a different perspective. Eva, what about you?
I don't know that it's all a whole lot of new information. I think a lot of it is just simply the confidence to do more of a certain kind of thing. You know, if part of your office is kind of old school and thinks everyone should only work in a certain mode, I think this kind of helps people understand that you can you can work in different ways and still be productive. And like Al was saying, I think clients understanding some of the technology that's out there that they weren't previously willing to try, this sort of forced their hand on that one. They had a crash course in learning how to do things online that they weren't doing before. So I think it's a lot of it's a comfort level of going to the next step on the technology that we have available. So.
That makes sense. So all of us, myself included, I do know what a telephone booth is, by the way, Greg, have been through at least two, you know, a previous recession, we'll say, some of us more than one recession. So I'd like to hear what lessons you've learned from those previous recessions or crises that maybe informed the way you handled this one and what your attitude has been. So if Eva, if you don't mind going again and telling us what your experience has been.
Sure. So it's a little different situation now. I mean, 2008 doesn't seem like that long ago in some respects, but in some ways it's a really long time ago. You know, I was one of two newer owners to our office at that time, and it was a bit of a shock to come into ownership, literally right as that recession was hitting. It hit the psyche, it hit the paycheck, it hit, you know, everything you can think of. All we could say was, what have we done? Why did we want to be owners? But I think a little different perspective now. We have a few years under our belt that we can kind of see things a little differently. I think one thing that I learned then that may or may not be applicable now is that it seemed before that recessions hit in layers. You have those frontline businesses that get hit automatically, and then there's sort of this second wave of businesses that are impacted by it. And then lastly, the public entities are affected because, you know, the tax revenues are down. And so we, here in Aggie land, you know, being a university-based economy, we had sort of a delayed hit for the recession last time. This one seems more like we just ran off a cliff. So, you know, it's kind of hard to see exactly the lessons learned from last time to this time, other than, hey, we survived it. We survived it once. We ought to be able to survive it again.
Got it. Greg, what about you?
During the S&L crash in the late 80s, I was living in Dallas, and a colleague and I developed this mantra, which was make no assumptions. So never assume that that client that owes you money is going to pay you. Never assume that that project that you think is bulletproof is really bulletproof. We as architects have to have a positive outlook about our business and what we do. But unfortunately, in times like this, you do have to temper that with some kind of cold, hard facts. And because of the scars from those past experiences, plus my experience, first time I had my own firm, our firm here is very lean and very nimble, and we are very debt averse. Our firm has zero debt. I mean, we have leases and things like that, but we have no debt. And I think the most important lesson is, if at all possible, don't take on debt to try and get through this, especially not to pay staff. And I know people are out there on this that are staff, but as a firm owner, unless you are 100% certain that a project is imminent and is going to happen, just the economics of our business is you'll never make that money back if you take on a lot of debt. And it just becomes a sword of Damocles hanging over your head as you move forward and try and recover. Right now, as a firm owner, you have to do everything you can do to live to fight another day. And that's the best thing for your firm, and it's the best thing for your employees too, even if temporarily there's interruption in work. So that's my lesson. It's just being overly optimistic, which is sometimes lead to problems.
Okay. What about you, Al? What has your experience through previous recessions taught you?
Well, I think we've learned a number of lessons over the past few of these. Coming out of the 2008, which really hit us more in 2011 and 12, because of our market, we have a lot of public sector work who carried us for a year or two pretty evenly through that initial downturn. But by 2011, 2012, the capital projects that we do were not being funded through the legislatures at that time. So one thing I would say is we've become really focused on tracking our key performance indicators, our KPIs. We do it, and we have been doing it for basically the last decade now, so that we can really get early predictions about when things are going to be going down. And those can be, how long is it taking our clients longer to pay us? Is our work in progress starting to build up and not getting billed? Do we have a lower backlog of work under contract? Along with our productivity numbers, our other performance indicators that we're tracking. We also think it's important that we have a response plan in place. Hopefully we never have to get to that and use it, but it's something that when we did our strategic plans over the past decade, we've known that we need to be able to have something in place. And I would say, and really echo Greg's comments, being able to act quickly is probably one of the critical lessons we've learned. Probably did not do that the last time as fast as we should have. And I would say that really we learned not to postpone those tough decisions or meter out bad decisions over a long period of time. It's just really disheartening for your staff. What we really learned was our staff want to know that we've got a plan in place and that we're going to be bold and confident enough to act on it. And that relieves a lot of anxiety in the office that can be a drag emotionally, but also on people's productivity.
That makes a lot of sense. So Greg, you kind of talked about this already, but what is your current outlook on the state of the economy and the profession right now?
Well, I think supposedly Yogi Berra said, predictions are hard, especially about the future. I would describe myself as a very concerned optimist. Because so many of the fundamentals were good before this hit, I have some optimism that things will eventually return to sustainable levels. I am cynically hopeful because the current administration is going to continue to pump money into the economy, because they're very fixated on the election. On the other hand, capital markets hate uncertainty. And even without this, election years in the past, we've seen projects on hold, waiting to see how the election plays out. And then you add this in, high degree of uncertainty. And the projects that we do are capital intensive, and they're 2 and 3 year projects, right? So people are looking ahead. And then consumer spending is the majority of our economy in this country. And I don't think there's any doubt it's going to be some time before people go back to their previous behavior. And when they do, many of them are going to be financially hobbled. So, my feeling is we haven't seen the worst of it yet in terms of economics. I think hopefully by 2021, things will be humming back along. But it's going to take us a while to dig out. I think like Eva said, this is, 90 miles an hour into a wall. And, I don't think our economy has ever had to deal with that, and certainly in our lifetime. So it's very hard to predict, but, we're architects. We have to be optimists. We have to look forward and be positive. So trying to do that at the same time, be realistic.
Fair. Al, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a hard time feeling optimistic in the near term. I think I'm probably more stoic. I'm focused really on planning and being prepared for what may be coming. I do think the ramifications of all this are going to be really large, and they're going to be with us for quite a while. As horrible as it's been, the health part of this crisis is probably just the tip of an iceberg. I mean, there's the economic and fiscal crises that are going to follow on this. We work for a lot of governmental agencies, cities, the states, universities. A lot of their revenue sources have just evaporated over the last few months, and I don't know how that's going to affect their commitment to construction projects over the next year or 2 years. When the legislature comes back next January, I'm not sure how confident they're going to be in the income they have available to fund projects at our universities and to fund education at the K-12 level. I think that there's going to be some pretty serious ramifications, not to mention all the money we have been putting into the economy has been borrowed. And that is something that's going to have decades-long ramifications on all of us and all of you young people out there who are listening.
Right. So Eva, what about you?
Yeah, that's what I would add to that is that I think the confidence issue is going to be really an issue because of the whole starting and stopping concept. I mean, there's so much uncertainty about the virus's state and what it's going to be doing in the short term or the long term. I don't think that once we even have a path, the path is going to necessarily be consistent. I think there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that one great solution, which would be either a treatment or a vaccine, is going to change a lot of these problems. The bad news is that finding a treatment and a vaccine is the solution to the problem. So there's just no way to determine when that's going to be, and this virus seems to be so difficult to deal with that I think anything that we've thought we were onto is a little more elusive in terms of finding those solutions. So.
Okay. Well, we're going to open things up for Q&A at this point. I did see there's a question from Fernando, and he's asking what preventative measures in order to prevent potential transmission are you guys talking about taking once your staff is back in the office, if you've had those conversations? Greg, have you guys discussed that as a firm?
We have. Our office is completely open, but we're very spread out. Our individual workstations are 12 feet apart. So we have good social distance. We're just taking it sort of a week at a time as to when we might ask people to come back. If they're comfortable, if they're not, we're not going to make anyone come back into the office. So our situation is fairly easy to keep clean and all of that, but it's a big concern, and it's in talking to clients and other business owners, there's a liability issue here too, because no matter what we're doing, and some of my best clients are lawyers, but there'll be a whole industry of liability after this as the economy opens up and people catch things and trying to blame people for it for not taking proper precautions. So, yeah, it's challenging. It's scary as a business owner.
Right. So Al, your office is a little bit bigger with 28 people. Do you guys have a plan in place, or are you still waiting things out?
Well, I will say, we are going to err on the side of caution. We've let everyone know that just because the governor says we're starting to open things up, we're not necessarily asking people to come in. In fact, we're not asking them to come in. We're going to be listening to our local leaders here in Austin, who I think have been very proactive in looking out for our well-being, and health leaders across the nation to really understand when it's safe for people to return. When that happens, and it's going to be at a time where we're very comfortable that the measures we can take, like rigorous cleaning, social distancing, hopefully it'll be at a time when we don't have to wear masks, but we're not going to come back until we can really feel confident that we can keep people safe in the office. And I think we're going to make that happen working remotely the way we've been doing it the last 6 weeks.
Fair enough. What about you, Eva?
Similar, we've started looking at what coming back might look like in terms of, like Greg's saying, our office is spread out enough that with 10 people, we should be able to maintain social distancing really well. We've been trying to look at the CDC guidelines for, cleaning protocols and the kinds of things that we know are within our control. There's a lot of things that aren't within our control, and those are the things that are, hard to put down into written policy at this point. So
Right.
There's also a certain comfort level, I think, that as someone said before, we're not going to put down a hard line saying you have to come back. If someone's more comfortable working from home, then that's certainly something we're going to allow.
Okay. So Corey's asking for the firms that are working remotely, which is most of you guys or most of your staff. Do you think this current situation has a negative impact on the education of the younger staff? So
I would say, if I could, it couldn't be as good as it was for sure. In our office, as you can see from my virtual background, it's all open, and there's a certain level of education you get just by being there and hanging out together. It's really that can't really be replaced by working remotely. What we've tried to do in this situation is with our younger staff, going sort of the extra mile in terms of spending more time trying to explain a situation or sending them pictures of a construction site and trying to explain to them what's going on. It's definitely an impact.
Greg, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think it's obvious. Our office being open, of course, people wear headphones to focus, but in my career, and I think for them, you learn a lot overhearing conversations. You hear somebody else talking to the GC, or you overhear the client presentation. There's a lot of they call it passive learning that happens that way. I think for the architects, the young architects in training, I mean, I wouldn't fixate on that part of it right now. I mean, if it's 3 or 4 months of diminished learning, now I don't know about, NCARB in terms of getting your credits to take the test, how they look at that, but it's a long journey to learn everything, and I don't think long term that part worries me as much.
Fair. So Veronica is asking about keeping monthly expenditures down right now. Are there any measures you all are taking to tackle that? Al, do you want to weigh in on that difficult question?
Yeah, and I want to first, though, say something about the mentorship. One thing
Sure.
that I have seen sort of tweaked up is that because so many meetings that normally would be out at a job site or at a client's office are happening on Zoom, and we are able to let younger staff sit in and hear what's happening in those meetings, whereas before the expense of taking someone on a 2-hour trip down just for that opportunity and had to be factored into that decision. It's pretty easy now to let a lot of younger staff sit in on meetings and observe what's happening and hear those dialogues. But I would agree with Greg that my best education was sitting in Marzette Fisher's office at a firm back in 1984 and just listening to the one side of his conversation all day long as he talked on the phone with clients and contractors and other people in the business. So I'm sorry, I need to get on to the question you put to me. Could you
want me to repeat that? Yeah, so
Sure.
Veronica was asking about basically keeping monthly expenses down right now. Things like, dealing with a leased office space, just as an example, or borrowed, office equipment. Are there any measures you guys are taking to try to cut back on some of those expenditures?
We came in and we reprogrammed all our thermostats to keep to not try to keep the office at 72 degrees as we move into the summer months. So we're on sort of a holiday schedule there. There's really not. I mean, our rent is due, and we've not tried to renegotiate that. We've got our copier lease, which we're not. A lot of that we pay by the unit. It's so many per copy. So that's really not an expense we can tackle. So I don't see that we've been able to shave a lot off our expenses. And by far the biggest thing in our expense is payroll.
Right.
Yeah.
And Al, if you don't mind sharing, do you guys lease or own your office space?
There's a group of us that own the building and another, and we rent it from that group.
Okay. Greg, do you have any?
We're, like I said, we try to be fairly lean. I mean, we looked at things like Creative Cloud licenses, which are expensive anyway. We have a laptop in our conference room that we have a full Creative Cloud license on that we use for presentations. You know, little things. I mean, it doesn't move the needle much. I think, you know, one thing I want to mention to a lot of the firm owners, small firm owners, your liability insurance, if like for us, we've done work for the city of Dallas, we're contractually obligated to maintain that coverage for a period of years. So, you know, one could debate the merits of, you know, first of all, not having liability coverage, which I wouldn't recommend. But, you know, if you have to cut something, there's a lot of implications to that. And again, not to bring up lawyers, but during the last two crashes, your insurance agent will tell you that claims against architects went up significantly in bad economic times because people get desperate and they look for ways to find money. So it's, you know, for us, we don't own our building. I wish we did. There's just not a whole lot, you know, just being careful, like Al said, thermostat, not too much we can do.
Okay. So Heather is asking about how everybody's dealing with construction sites. I don't know if she wants to add on to that question, but I'm guessing she's referring to, you know, protocols for your staff who are visiting active construction sites. So Eva, do you guys have any active construction sites right now?
We do, and really we've been kind of going by what our contractors are doing because most of them have implemented certain safeguards, and so we're basically following suit with what their requirements are. Most of them are requiring masks on site, so we are asking our employees to comply with that. And you know, we're not going to visit a site any less than we should, but we're asking people not to go out just for the heck of it anymore. Try to be conservative in those kinds of visits. But
what about you, Al? You guys have active construction in your firm?
Oh, we absolutely do. And several things. One, we've let everyone know, our owners and our contractors, that we're not going to be on site when there's active work going on. We're scheduling our observation visits for late in the afternoon after the crews have gone so that we're able to maintain social distance protocols. Everyone who's on site is wearing masks and following, you know, hand washing and other safety protocols. We even have some Tyvek suits that we have available. We have a couple of furniture installations which may be going on for 2 or 3 weeks, like $7 or $8 million worth of office furniture getting installed. And in that case, we're contracted to actually be on site and watch it as it's being assembled and put together, and we're really concerned about that. And so we're gonna, that's why we have the safety PPE available. I will say we have some really great contractors we work with who are really stepping up with the technological means to do remote observations. There's a lot of really promising software out there that we're starting to implement on projects that will allow us to do a lot of those observations remotely. Now, some, I don't think, definitely not all will be able to be done that way, but I hope that's something that catches on and that we can have the camera set up and the technology in place where we don't have to run out to a job site just to see some conditions.
Okay, so Travis is asking, I'm going to see if I get his question right here. He's basically asking about your impressions of the various project types that are going on right now, and whether you see, certain ones of those coming back first, and if you're maybe refocusing your marketing efforts or business development efforts on certain project types. Are you pivoting to something different right now? Greg, do you want to?
Yeah, I would. That's a great question, and that's what makes this thing so different than others. In the S&L crash, I was incredibly just lucky. I had just started working at a firm that had a deep history of municipal work and libraries. Well, the S&L crash, the municipal sector was going great guns throughout that. Our firm actually grew during the late 80s. During the Great Recession, I happened to be working at a firm that was doing international work. This time around, like Al said and Eva, the public sector is not a safe harbor. The university system, I thought I read, is looking at a 30% revenue cut. City governments are losing tax money. The oil, the severance tax is a huge fund for the state. Frankly, I think governments, from everything I'm seeing, are going to be actually a lagging return. They're going to actually come back after the tax revenue starts flowing in for a couple of years, maybe. So I'm very worried about that. See, the things that I hear the most about are affordable housing. And look, as architects, the housing we do is not affordable. Most of the stuff we do is very expensive. There's still a tremendous hole in our system for housing for like normal people. And we're certainly interested in looking into that. Of course, that requires capital for developers. Retail and restaurant, which we do a fair amount of, oddly enough, probably will have some work, sadly, because there's going to be a lot of empty storefronts. There's a lot of restaurants and retail that are not going to come out of this, and so therefore, over time, they'll need to be renovated. Other than that, I don't see a lot of bright spots. We're not, now healthcare we don't do, I can't speak to that. I think primary education and school districts, it's not a great environment to have a bond election. If you've already passed it, that's a different thing. So I thought I heard that the UT system put a freeze on all capital projects. So unfortunately, it's going to be very spotty to find those markets, at least from my perspective. I hope I'm missing something.
Eva, do you have anything to add to that? Are you guys seeing anything different?
No, not really. I think Greg really covered it on that one.
All right, let's see. Carol had a question about maintaining contact with your clients and owners that have put projects on hold. So for those of you that do have projects on hold, how are you making sure that you're still keeping in contact with those folks so that they'll hopefully come back?
Yeah.
Al, do you want to tackle that? Do you have any projects on hold right now? I think you said you did.
We have one residential client who's put their project on hold. We've got another one that is potentially at risk. I'll say I've been doing a lot of phone calls to particularly our institutional clients who haven't yet put things on hold, but just to try to figure out what they're hearing up their food chain through our projects that are currently under construction or under design. Are we going to get to the point where they just stop moving forward on those, or is it just new projects that are going to potentially be affected? A lot of what Greg was saying, a lot of public sector work is bond funded. And school districts, of course, have to get approval for those bonds. But a lot of the universities in the state projects, they're also bond funded. And really, I think we need to be encouraging our leaders to not let the tax revenue crisis that they're going to be facing get in the way of moving forward on a lot of these capital projects, because they're not paid from tax revenue. They're paid out of bonds. There's a lot of built up need and that we need to build in the state of Texas, and we really need to be doing it over the next year or two to keep the economy going, to help bring it back. And those bond-funded projects that the state government can move forward on are really probably the best hope for an economic stimulus that the state has. So I'm hoping there'll be some wisdom on that front.
Well, I would add to that, the sad part of this is, on one hand, it's a really great time to be doing those kind of projects. Probably, well, no one's seen evidence yet, but the escalation in construction prices has, before this happened, has put the brakes on a number of projects that we've had, particularly high-end residential. Just a lot of sticker shock. We do, as I mentioned, first-class airline lounges around the country. We have one in Las Vegas, a very large one we were getting to renovate and completely gut. And the client was having heartburn trying to figure out how to do that to not close the lounge. Well, right now is an amazing time to be doing it, but they're hoarding cash. So understandably. So it's sort of a shame. I think I have one client who has some cash, and he's a developer, and he is actively looking for values. And there are people out there that do have cash that are protected. They're going to be out looking for value proposition projects, maybe picking up existing projects at a discount, whatever. And we are seeing, I've seen some commercial properties come on sale that surprised us a little bit. So there's obviously buying opportunities for those that are in position to act upon them.
All right, well, we have reached the end of our time, so we appreciate all of our panelists. Thank you, Greg, Al, and Eva, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And special thanks to all of our attendees who hung in there, even though we went over a little bit here. I did want to answer a couple questions that we were getting in the chat. There are questions that you have to answer in order to get CE credit, and this webinar is going to be posted by the 1st of next week to the Texas Society of Architects COVID-19 page. So look out for that. And I think that's all we have. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Be well.